The millionaire waved $200,000 at the terrified crowd, daring anyone to approach the stallion that had sent 3 trainers to the hospital with shattered bones, and an 8-year-old boy's hand shot into the air. What the deadly horse did when Miguel stepped into that arena would bring the ruthless millionaire to his knees. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The dust rose in golden swirls under the dying light of the Texas sun, painting the arena in hues of amber and rust. The crowd had gathered at the Hartwell Ranch, drawn by whispers and rumors that had spread through the small town like wildfire. Something extraordinary was about to happen, they said. Something that would change the lives of everyone who witnessed it. At the center of the arena stood a horse unlike any other, a massive black stallion with legs marked by striking white feathers that seemed to glow against his dark coat. His name was Thunder, and for the past 3 years, he had been the most feared animal in the entire county. No one could ride him. No one could even approach him without risking serious injury. He had thrown every trainer, every cowboy, every expert who had dared to try. Some said he was cursed. Others claimed he was simply wild beyond redemption. But the truth, as it often does, ran much deeper than anyone could have imagined. Standing before the crowd was Victor Hartwell, a man whose wealth was matched only by his arrogance. His ranch sprawled across thousands of acres. His bank accounts held more money than most people could spend in 10 lifetimes. And his reputation as a ruthless businessman preceded him wherever he went. Victor wore his success like armor, his tailored denim shirt and custom leather chaps speaking of a man who believed he could buy anything and anyone. He had purchased Thunder at an auction 2 years prior, paying an astronomical sum for what he believed would be the crown jewel of his stable. Instead, he had acquired a nightmare. The stallion had injured 3 of his best trainers, destroyed countless pieces of equipment, and become the subject of Victor's growing frustration. Today, he had decided to turn his failure into a spectacle. Victor raised his hand high above his head, his voice booming across the arena with the confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. $200,000, he announced, his eyes scanning the crowd with a mixture of contempt and amusement. That is what I will pay to whoever can tame this beast. $200,000 to anyone brave enough or foolish enough to try. The crowd murmured in response, a ripple of excitement and fear passing through them like an electric current. $200,000 was more money than most of them would see in their entire lives. It was enough to pay off mortgages, send children to college, start new lives far from the dust and hardship of ranch country. Yet no one moved. They had all heard the stories about Thunder. They had seen the injuries, the broken bones, the shattered dreams. The money was tempting, but not tempting enough to risk their lives. Among the spectators stood a small boy named Miguel, just 8 years old, with dust on his worn jeans and hope in his dark eyes. He had come to the ranch with his mother Elena, who worked as a housekeeper in Victor's sprawling mansion. Miguel spent most of his days helping wherever he could, carrying supplies, cleaning stables, doing whatever small tasks would earn them a few extra dollars. His father had died 2 years ago in an accident at a construction site, leaving behind debts that threatened to swallow what little they had. Elena worked double shifts, her hands raw from scrubbing floors and washing dishes, her back bent from years of labor. Miguel watched his mother grow thinner, watched the light in her eyes dim with each passing month, and he had sworn to himself that one day he would find a way to help her. Today, watching Victor wave that impossible sum of money, something stirred in the boy's chest. But Miguel's connection to Thunder went beyond the promise of wealth. For the past several months, he had been secretly visiting the stallion in the evenings, after everyone else had gone home. It had started by accident. One night, while his mother finished her duties in the main house, Miguel had wandered near the stable where Thunder was kept in isolation. He expected to see the monster everyone described, the wild beast that attacked without warning. Instead, he found a creature trembling in the corner of his stall, eyes wide with fear rather than fury. Miguel recognized that look. He had seen it in the mirror after his father's funeral, in his mother's face when she counted their dwindling savings. It was the look of someone who had been hurt so badly they no longer trusted the world. That first night, Miguel simply sat outside Thunder's stall and talked. He told the horse about his father, about how he used to lift Miguel onto his shoulders and make him feel like he could touch the sky. He talked about his mother's tired smile, about the small apartment where they lived, about his dreams of one day having enough money to buy her a house with a garden where she could rest. Thunder listened. At first, he stayed pressed against the far wall, but as Miguel's soft voice filled the silence, something shifted. The horse's ears turned toward the boy. His breathing slowed. By the end of that first visit, Thunder had taken a single step closer. It was a small thing, almost imperceptible, but Miguel felt it like a victory. Night after night, Miguel returned. He brought apples he had saved from his own meals, carrots he had found discarded behind the kitchen. He never tried to touch Thunder, never made sudden movements, never demanded anything from the broken creature. He simply offered his presence, his patience, his understanding. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, impossibly, Thunder began to change. He would approach the stall door when he heard Miguel's footsteps. He would lower his great head to accept the treats the boy offered. Once, just once, he had allowed Miguel to rest his small hand against his muzzle, and in that moment, boy and horse had understood each other perfectly. They were both survivors. They were both fighting battles that the world could not see. They were both desperate to be understood. Now, standing in that dusty arena with Victor's challenge hanging in the air, Miguel looked at Thunder and saw what no one else could see. He saw the scars beneath the stallion's wild behavior, the pain that had never been acknowledged, the trust that had been shattered by cruel hands and careless treatment. He saw a creature waiting to be saved. And in that moment, before fear could stop him, before common sense could hold him back, Miguel raised his small hand into the air. The crowd fell silent. Victor's eyes narrowed with disbelief, and Thunder, the untamable beast, turned his massive head toward the boy who had shown him kindness in the darkness. The silence that followed Miguel's raised hand was deafening. Every eye in the arena turned toward the small boy standing at the edge of the crowd, his thin arms stretched toward the sky like a fragile branch reaching for sunlight. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed. The absurdity of the situation seemed to freeze time itself. Then, cutting through the stillness like a knife, came the sound of Victor Hartwell's laughter. It started as a chuckle, low and dismissive, then grew into a full-bellied roar that echoed across the dusty arena. The crowd, uncertain how to react, began to laugh along with him, their nervous giggles mixing with Victor's cruel amusement. Victor strode toward Miguel, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each confident step. He stopped just a few feet from the boy, looking down at him with eyes that held no warmth, only the cold calculation of a man who viewed the world as a series of transactions. "Well, well, well," he drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. "What do we have here? A little hero?" He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms wide as if inviting them to share in the joke. "Ladies and gentlemen, it seems we have a volunteer. This child, this tiny thing, believes he can do what grown men have failed to accomplish." The laughter grew louder, crueler, and Miguel felt his cheeks burn with shame, but he did not lower his hand. From somewhere in the crowd, a desperate cry pierced the mockery. "Miguel, no!" Elena pushed through the spectators, her face pale with terror, her eyes wide with the kind of fear only a mother can know. She grabbed her son's arm, trying to pull it down, trying to drag him away from the arena and the danger that waited within it. "Please, mijo," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "This is not our fight. We cannot afford to lose you. I cannot lose you." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with grief and love, and the memory of a husband and father who would never come home again. Miguel looked at his mother, and in that moment, she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. It was not recklessness or childish bravado. It was certainty. "Mama," he said softly, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "I know this horse. I have spent months talking to him, being with him. He is not a monster. He is afraid, just like we were afraid after Papa died, just like we are afraid now." Elena's grip on his arm loosened as she stared at her son, seeing him clearly for the first time. He was no longer the baby she had carried in her arms. the toddler she had chased through their small apartment. He was becoming something more, something stronger, shaped by loss and hardship into a person of unexpected courage. Victor watched this exchange with growing impatience. His spectacle was being derailed by sentiment, and he had no tolerance for such things. "Enough of this nonsense," he snapped, waving his hand dismissively. "Take the boy and his mother away. This challenge is for real men, not for children playing pretend." He turned his back on them, already scanning the crowd for someone more suitable, someone whose participation would provide better entertainment. But before his men could move toward Miguel, a voice rang out from among the spectators. "Let the boy try." The crowd parted to reveal an old man leaning on a wooden cane, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind, his eyes sharp despite his age. His name was Samuel Crow, and he was a legend in these parts. 50 years ago, he had been the finest horse trainer in the state, known for his ability to reach animals that others had given up on. He had retired long ago, but his reputation still carried weight. Victor's expression soured at the interruption, but he knew better than to dismiss Samuel outright. The old man commanded respect that even money could not buy. Samuel made his way slowly toward Miguel, each step deliberate and measured. When he reached the boy, he placed a gnarled hand on his shoulder and looked deep into his eyes. "You say you know this horse," he said, his voice low enough that only Miguel could hear. "Tell me what you see when you look at him." Miguel turned his gaze toward Thunder, who stood in the center of the arena, his muscles tense, his ears flat against his head. Everyone else saw a dangerous animal ready to attack. Miguel saw something different. "I see a horse that was hurt," Miguel answered quietly. "Someone was cruel to him before Mr. Hartwell bought him. You can see it in how he flinches when people raise their hands, how he kicks when someone approaches from behind. He is not trying to hurt anyone. He is trying to protect himself because he thinks everyone wants to hurt him." Samuel's eyes widened slightly, and he nodded slowly. The boy had seen what trained professionals had missed, what Victor, with all his money, had never bothered to understand. This child had looked beyond the surface and found the truth hiding beneath. Samuel turned to face Victor, his voice rising so that all could hear. "Let the boy try," he repeated. "What do you have to lose, Hartwell? If he fails, you can continue your little show. But if he succeeds, you will have a story worth telling." Victor's jaw tightened. He did not like being challenged, especially not by an old man living on past glories. But the crowd was watching, and he could sense their interest shifting. They wanted to see what would happen. They wanted to believe in the impossible. "Fine," Victor spat, throwing his hands up in exaggerated surrender. "Let the boy make a fool of himself. But when that horse throws him, when he comes crawling back, crying for his mama, remember that I warned you all." He gestured toward the arena, a cruel smile playing at the corners of his lips. "Go ahead, little hero. Show us your magic." The crowd fell silent once more as Miguel stepped away from his mother's trembling hands. He walked toward the fence that separated the spectators from the arena, his heart pounding in his chest but his steps never faltering. Behind him, Elena clasped her hands together in prayer, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. Miguel climbed through the fence rails and dropped into the arena. The dust swirled around his small boots as he straightened up and faced Thunder. The stallion stood perhaps 30 feet away, his massive body coiled with tension, his dark eyes fixed on the approaching figure. To everyone watching, it looked like a lamb walking toward a lion. They waited for the explosion of violence, for the terrifying display of power they had witnessed so many times before. But Thunder did not charge. He did not rear up on his powerful legs or bare his teeth in warning. Instead, something remarkable happened. The stallion's ears, which had been pinned back in fear and aggression, slowly began to move forward. His head, held high in defensive posture, gradually lowered. And in his eyes, visible only to those who knew how to look, a spark of recognition flickered to life. Miguel stood perfectly still in the center of the arena, allowing Thunder to process his presence. He knew that rushing would destroy everything they had built together over those quiet months of secret visits. The crowd watched in breathless anticipation, some leaning forward on the wooden railings, others covering their mouths with their hands as if afraid that even their breath might disturb the fragile scene unfolding before them. Victor stood with his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of skepticism and barely concealed annoyance. He was certain the boy would fail. He was equally certain that the failure would be spectacular enough to salvage his entertainment. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty ground as Miguel began to speak. His voice was soft, barely above a whisper, but in the silence of the arena, it carried like a song. "Hey there, big guy," he murmured, the same words he had used countless times in the darkness of the stable. "It is just me. It is just Miguel. You remember me, do you not?" Thunder's ears twitched at the familiar sound. His nostrils flared as he drew in the boy's scent, searching for confirmation of what his eyes and ears were telling him. The tension in his massive body began to ease muscle by muscle as recognition settled into his bones. The spectators exchanged confused glances. They had expected screaming, chaos, the thunder of hooves against the ground. Instead, they witnessed something that defied everything they thought they knew about this horse. Thunder took a step forward, then another. His movements were cautious but deliberate, each step bringing him closer to the small figure that stood waiting with infinite patience. Someone in the crowd gasped. Another whispered a prayer. Even Victor's smug expression began to falter as he watched the impossible unfold before his eyes. Miguel did not move toward Thunder. He waited, letting the horse come to him on his own terms, respecting the boundaries that trust requires. This was the lesson his father had taught him years ago, before the accident, before their world had shattered into pieces too small to reassemble. "Patience, mijo," his father used to say. "Patience is the language of love. Animals understand it better than words. You cannot force trust. You can only create the space for it to grow." Miguel had carried those words with him through the darkest days of his young life, and now they guided him in this moment that would determine everything. Thunder stopped just a few feet from Miguel, close enough that the boy could feel the warmth radiating from the stallion's massive body. For a long moment, neither moved. They simply looked at each other, two souls that had found connection in the midst of their separate sufferings. Then, slowly, Thunder lowered his great head until his muzzle was level with Miguel's face. The crowd held its collective breath. This was the moment when the horse had attacked before, when his powerful head had become a weapon, when trainers had been sent flying through the air like rag dolls. But Thunder did not attack. Instead, he pressed his muzzle gently against Miguel's chest, right over his heart, and let out a long, shuddering breath. It was a gesture of surrender, of acceptance, of trust so profound that several people in the crowd began to weep openly. Miguel raised his small hands and placed them on either side of Thunder's face, cradling the horse's head as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Because to him, in that moment, it was. "You are safe now," Miguel whispered, his own eyes glistening with tears he refused to let fall. "No one is going to hurt you anymore, I promise." Samuel Crow watched from the fence, his weathered face transformed by a smile that seemed to take years off his age. In 50 years of working with horses, he had never seen anything quite like this. The boy had not used force or tricks or equipment. He had used something far more powerful. He had used understanding. He had looked at a creature that everyone else had written off as dangerous and worthless, and he had seen its pain. More importantly, he had responded to that pain with compassion rather than fear. It was, Samuel thought, the purest form of horsemanship he had ever witnessed. Victor's face had gone pale beneath his tan. His hands, which had been confidently crossed over his chest, now hung limply at his sides. This was not how things were supposed to go. The boy was supposed to fail. The horse was supposed to remain untamed, a symbol of wildness that even the great Victor Hartwell could not conquer. Instead, this child from nowhere, this son of a housekeeper, was making him look like a fool in front of everyone who mattered. The rage building inside him was almost enough to make him stop the whole thing, to declare it invalid, to find some reason to deny what was happening right in front of him. But he could not. The crowd had seen too much. They had witnessed the moment when Thunder, the terror of the county, had submitted to a boy who barely reached the horse's shoulder. They had seen the gentleness in the stallion's eyes, the way his body had relaxed, the trust that had replaced his fear. To deny it now would be to admit something even worse than defeat. It would be to admit that he had been wrong, that his methods had failed not because the horse was impossible to reach, but because he had never tried to understand him in the first place. Elena watched her son from the edge of the arena, her hands still clasped in prayer, her tears still flowing freely. But they were no longer tears of fear. They were tears of pride, of wonder, of overwhelming love for this child who had somehow become so much more than she had ever imagined. She saw his father in him now, in the gentle way he touched the horse, in the patience that seemed to radiate from his small frame. "Roberto," she whispered to the heavens, "do you see him? Do you see what our son has become?" And though the sky offered no answer, Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fading Texas sun. In the arena, Miguel was preparing for the next step. Calming Thunder was only the beginning. To truly answer Victor's challenge, he would need to do something that seemed even more impossible. He would need to ride the horse that had thrown every rider who had ever tried. Miguel looked up at Thunder, fully aware of what he was about to attempt. The stallion stood nearly 17 hands high, a mountain of muscle and power that dwarfed the small boy completely. Even with the connection they had built, even with the trust that now flowed between them like an invisible river, what Miguel was about to do carried enormous risk. One wrong movement, one moment of fear, and Thunder could revert to his defensive instincts. The horse had thrown experienced riders with decades of training. Miguel had never ridden anything larger than the old donkey that belonged to their neighbor back when they still lived in the country. But Miguel also knew something that none of those experienced riders had understood. Thunder had not thrown them because he was wild or evil or unbreakable. He had thrown them because they had approached him as a problem to be solved, a challenge to be conquered. They had tried to dominate him, to force their will upon him through bits and spurs and the cruel pressure of their hands. They had treated him as a thing to be used rather than a being to be respected. And Thunder, who had already suffered so much at the hands of humans who saw him only as property, had responded the only way he knew how. He had fought back. Miguel turned to face the crowd, his eyes scanning until they found his mother. Elena stood frozen, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. She wanted to run into the arena and snatch her son away from danger. She wanted to believe in him the way he seemed to believe in himself. She wanted to honor the memory of her husband, who had always said that Miguel was destined for something special. Most of all, she wanted her child to be safe, to grow old, to have the life that had been stolen from his father. Miguel held her gaze for a long moment, pouring every ounce of love and reassurance he possessed into that silent connection. Then he nodded once, a promise that needed no words. Turning back to Thunder, Miguel approached the stallion's side with measured steps. He placed one hand on Thunder's neck, feeling the powerful muscles beneath the sleek black coat. The horse stood perfectly still, his breathing slow and steady, his eyes following the boy's movements with calm attention. Miguel spoke to him continuously, a soft stream of words that mattered less for their meaning than for their tone. He talked about his father, about the little garden his mother dreamed of, about the stars he used to count from his bedroom window when sleep would not come. He talked about loneliness and loss and the unexpected places where healing could be found. When Miguel reached Thunder's side, he faced a practical problem. The horse wore no saddle, no bridle, nothing that would help a rider mount or maintain their position. Victor had removed all equipment months ago after Thunder had destroyed 3 saddles in violent protests. The stallion stood bare, his powerful back a smooth expanse that offered no handholds, no stirrups, no assistance whatsoever. For a grown man, mounting bareback would be challenging. For a small boy, it seemed physically impossible. Samuel Crow recognized the problem immediately. He turned to one of the ranch hands standing nearby and spoke in urgent, hushed tones. Moments later, the man disappeared into the crowd, returning shortly with a simple wooden crate. Samuel carried it to the edge of the arena and held it up for Miguel to see. The boy nodded gratefully as another ranch hand, moved by the extraordinary scene he was witnessing, carried the crate into the arena and placed it beside Thunder. The stallion's ears flickered at the stranger's approach, but a soft word from Miguel kept him calm. Miguel stepped onto the crate, which brought him level with Thunder's back. He could see the scars now, thin white lines that crisscrossed the horse's hide in places where the hair had never quite grown back. Someone had beaten this animal. Someone had taken whips and perhaps worse to his flesh, trying to break his spirit through pain and fear. The realization made Miguel's heart ache with renewed determination. No one would ever hurt Thunder again. He would make sure of it, no matter what happened in the next few minutes. With infinite care, Miguel placed his hands on Thunder's back and began to shift his weight. The horse remained motionless, his head turned slightly to watch the boy's progress. The crowd had gone so silent that Miguel could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He could feel the eyes of 100 people fixed upon him, their hopes and doubts and fears pressing against him like physical weight. But he pushed it all away, focusing only on Thunder, only on this moment, only on the trust they had built together in the quiet darkness of lonely nights. In one smooth motion, Miguel swung his leg over Thunder's back and settled onto the horse. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Thunder shifted beneath him, adjusting to the unfamiliar weight, and Miguel felt his stomach drop with sudden fear. This was the moment when everything could fall apart. This was when the horse remembered his pain, his betrayal, his determination never to let another human control him. Miguel closed his eyes and leaned forward, wrapping his arms around Thunder's neck in an embrace rather than a grip. "I trust you," he whispered directly into the horse's ear. "And I need you to trust me. We are the same, you and I. We have both been broken by things we could not control. But broken things can be made whole again. We can be whole again, together." Thunder's body trembled beneath him, and for one terrible moment, Miguel was certain the horse would rear up and send him flying through the air. He braced himself for the impact, for the pain, for the failure that would prove Victor right and break his mother's heart. But the impact never came. Instead, Thunder let out a long breath that seemed to release years of tension and fear. His body relaxed, his head lowered, and he stood perfectly still with Miguel on his back. The boy opened his eyes to find tears streaming down his cheeks, tears of relief and joy and overwhelming gratitude. They had done it. Against all odds, against every expectation, they had done the impossible. And in the stunned silence of the arena, even Victor Hartwell could find no words to diminish what he had just witnessed. The arena seemed suspended in time, as if the world itself was holding its breath to witness what would happen next. Miguel sat atop Thunder, his small hands buried in the horse's dark mane, his legs pressed against the stallion's powerful sides. He could feel Thunder's heartbeat beneath him, strong and steady, a rhythm that matched his own. The connection between them had transcended words, transcended species, transcended everything that logic said should keep them apart. They were no longer a boy and a horse. They were two wounded souls that had found each other in the darkness and decided to face the light together. Slowly, almost experimentally, Thunder began to move. His first step was tentative, careful, as if he was testing whether the weight on his back would bring pain or punishment. When nothing bad happened, he took another step, then another. The crowd watched in mesmerized silence as the most dangerous horse in the county walked calmly across the arena with an 8-year-old boy on his back. No saddle, no bridle, no equipment of any kind. Just trust, pure and simple, guiding them both through this miraculous moment. Miguel leaned forward and spoke softly into Thunder's ear, guiding him with gentle pressure from his legs and the subtle shifting of his weight. It was instinctive, natural, as if they had been riding together for years rather than minutes. Thunder responded to every cue, his movements becoming more confident as they circled the arena. His ears were forward now, alert but calm, and there was something in his bearing that had not been there before. Pride, perhaps. Or maybe it was simply the joy of finally being understood. Victor Hartwell watched the scene with an expression that shifted between disbelief and barely concealed fury. His great spectacle, his moment of triumph over the untamable beast, had been stolen by a child who had no business being in his arena. The $200,000 he had offered so confidently now hung over him like a guillotine blade. He was a man who prided himself on never losing, on always finding a way to turn situations to his advantage. But as he watched Miguel and Thunder move together in perfect harmony, he realized with growing horror that he had no escape from the promise he had made. The crowd, which had been silent with amazement, began to stir. First came the whispers, people leaning toward their neighbors to confirm that they were actually seeing what they thought they were seeing. Then came the smiles, breaking across weathered faces like sunlight after a storm. And finally, building slowly but surely, came the applause. It started with Samuel Crow, his gnarled hands coming together in a rhythmic celebration that echoed across the arena. Others joined in, then more, until the air was filled with the thunder of clapping hands and cheering voices. Elena could not see through her tears. Her vision was blurred, her chest heaving with sobs that were equal parts relief and overwhelming pride. Her son, her beautiful, brave, impossible son, had done something that grown men had failed to do. He had looked at a creature that everyone had given up on and had seen its worth. He had reached out with kindness when everyone else had reached out with force, and in doing so, he had proven something that went far beyond horse training. He had proven that compassion was stronger than cruelty, that understanding was more powerful than domination, that love could heal wounds that seemed beyond repair. Miguel guided Thunder toward the fence where his mother stood, bringing the horse to a gentle stop directly in front of her. Elena reached out with trembling hands, and Thunder, the horse who had bitten and kicked anyone who came too close, lowered his head and allowed her touch. It was an offering, a gift from the animal to the mother of the boy who had saved him. Elena laughed through her tears, running her fingers along Thunder's velvet nose, feeling the warm breath that proved this moment was real and not just a beautiful dream. "I told you, Mama," Miguel said, his own voice thick with emotion. "I told you he was not a monster. He just needed someone to understand." Elena looked up at her son, this child who carried so much of his father within him, and felt her heart swell until she thought it might burst. "You did it, mijo," she whispered. "You really did it. Your father would be so proud." At the mention of his father, Miguel's composure finally cracked. Tears streamed down his dusty cheeks, but he did not try to hide them. These were not tears of weakness. They were tears of triumph, of remembrance, of a love that death itself could not diminish. The celebration was interrupted by Victor's voice, sharp and demanding as he pushed through the crowd toward the fence. "Enough of this circus," he declared, his face flushed with anger that he could barely control. "The boy got lucky. One ride around the arena proves nothing. That horse is still dangerous, still worthless, still mine." He pointed a finger at Miguel, his hand shaking with barely suppressed rage. "This changes nothing. I never said the money was for a single ride. I said it was for whoever could tame him completely." The crowd's cheers died down, replaced by angry murmurs. They could see what Victor was doing. He was trying to weasel out of his promise, trying to find technicalities that would allow him to keep his money and his pride intact. It was the kind of behavior they had come to expect from men like him, men who believed that rules applied only to others. Samuel Crow stepped forward, his eyes blazing with a fire that belied his advanced age. "We all heard what you said, Hartwell," Samuel declared, his voice carrying across the arena with surprising strength. "You offered $200,000 to whoever could tame this horse. That boy has done more in 15 minutes than your so-called experts did in 2 years. He approached an animal that would not let anyone near him. He mounted without any equipment. He rode him around this arena as calm as you please." The old man gestured toward Thunder, who stood peacefully beside Elena, showing no signs of the aggression that had terrorized the ranch for so long. "If that is not taming a horse, then I do not know what is. Pay the boy what you owe him." The confrontation between Samuel and Victor had drawn the attention of everyone present. The crowd pressed closer, their faces reflecting a mixture of anticipation and righteous anger. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that had touched their hearts and reminded them that miracles were still possible in a world that often seemed devoid of wonder. Now they watched as a wealthy man tried to deny a poor boy the reward he had clearly earned. and their sense of justice would not allow them to remain silent. Victor's face contorted with barely contained rage as he stared down the old horseman. Samuel Crow might have been a legend once, but those days were long past. He was nothing now but a relic, a reminder of a simpler time that had no place in the modern world of business and profit. Victor had not built his empire by bowing to public pressure or honoring promises that no longer served his interests. He had built it by being ruthless, by finding angles that others missed, by never admitting defeat, even when defeat seemed certain. "You have no authority here, Crow," Victor spat, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is my ranch, my horse, my money. I decide what constitutes success, not you, not this crowd, and certainly not some child who got lucky with a broken animal." He turned to face the spectators, spreading his arms wide as if appealing to their reason. "Think about what you're asking me to do. You want me to hand over $200,000 to an 8-year-old boy because he managed to sit on a horse for 5 minutes. That is not taming. That is a circus trick." The crowd's murmuring grew louder, angrier. They did not appreciate being dismissed, being treated as if their eyes had deceived them. They had seen what they had seen, and no amount of wealthy arrogance could change that reality. Among them, voices began to rise in protest. "Pay the boy," someone shouted from the back. "He earned it fair and square." Others took up the cry, their calls merging into a chorus that echoed across the arena. "Pay the boy, pay the boy, pay the boy." Miguel remained seated on Thunder throughout the confrontation, watching the scene unfold with a maturity that seemed impossible for someone his age. He had not entered this arena for money, though he knew how desperately his family needed it. He had entered because he could not stand by and watch Thunder be tormented any longer, could not allow the horse he had come to love be subjected to more cruelty in the name of entertainment. The $200,000 had been an afterthought, a distant dream that seemed too impossible to truly hope for. Now, watching Victor squirm and deflect, Miguel felt something unexpected rising in his chest. It was not anger or disappointment. It was pity. This man, with all his wealth and power, was more trapped than Thunder had ever been. He was imprisoned by his own pride, his own need to always be right, his own inability to admit that someone else might know better. Miguel had seen animals like this before, creatures so damaged by their circumstances that they could not recognize kindness even when it was offered freely. Victor Hartwell was such a creature. He had built walls around his heart so high and so thick that nothing good could penetrate them. And in doing so, he had condemned himself to a loneliness that all his money could never cure. Elena watched her son with growing concern. She could see him studying Victor, could see the wheels turning behind his dark eyes. She knew that look. It was the same expression her husband used to wear when he was working through a problem, turning it over in his mind until he found a solution that satisfied both logic and conscience. Roberto had always said that the measure of a person was not how they treated those above them, but how they treated those below. Miguel had inherited that belief, had absorbed it into his very being, and now Elena could see him applying it to the man who held their future in his greedy hands. Miguel gently urged Thunder forward, guiding the horse toward Victor with the same calm confidence he had shown throughout this extraordinary afternoon. The crowd fell silent, watching as the boy approached the millionaire. Victor stiffened, his eyes darting toward the horse with undisguised fear. Despite all his bluster, he was terrified of Thunder. He had always been terrified, though he would never admit it. That fear was part of why he had treated the animal so badly, why he had delegated all contact to hired hands while he watched from safe distances. Now the object of his fear was walking toward him, and he could not retreat without losing face. Thunder stopped just a few feet from Victor, and Miguel looked down at the wealthy man with eyes that held no malice, no triumph, no childish gloating. Instead, there was something far more unsettling. There was understanding. "Mr. Hartwell," Miguel said, his voice soft but clear enough for everyone to hear, "I did not come here for your money. I came here because Thunder needed someone to speak for him, someone to show everyone that he is not what you made him seem." The boy paused, stroking Thunder's mane gently. But my mother works very hard. She works so hard that her hands crack and bleed. She works so hard that she falls asleep crying from exhaustion. That money could change our lives." Victor's expression flickered, something passing behind his eyes too quickly to identify. He opened his mouth to respond, but Miguel continued before he could speak. "However, I know that you do not want to pay. I can see it in your face. You are angry because you think you lost somehow, like this was a competition between us. But it was never a competition, Mr. Hartwell. It was never about winning or losing." Miguel gestured toward Thunder, toward the scars hidden beneath the beautiful black coat. It was about him. It was always about him. The arena had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have stilled, waiting to hear what would come next. Victor stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his carefully constructed armor of arrogance showing cracks for the first time. No one had ever spoken to him like this, certainly not a child. No one had ever looked past his wealth and power to see the frightened, lonely man hiding beneath. And now this boy, this insignificant child of a housekeeper, had done exactly that in front of everyone who mattered. The weight of Miguel's words hung in the air like morning fog over the valley. Victor Hartwell, a man who had spent his entire adult life building walls of wealth and power to protect himself from vulnerability, stood exposed before a child who had seen through every defense. The crowd watched in silence, sensing that something profound was happening, something that transcended the simple matter of money or horses. This was a moment of reckoning, a collision between two entirely different ways of seeing the world. Victor's mind raced through his options, searching for an escape route that would preserve his dignity and his fortune. He could claim that the boy had cheated somehow, that there had been prior contact with the horse that violated the spirit of the challenge. He could argue that true taming required weeks of consistent behavior, not a single afternoon performance. He could simply refuse to pay and dare anyone to stop him. His lawyers were the best in the state. No court would side with a housekeeper's son against a man of his stature and resources. The legal battle alone would cost the family more than they could ever hope to recover. But as Victor looked into Miguel's eyes, something unexpected happened. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he saw himself clearly. Not the image he projected to the world, not the successful businessman who had clawed his way up from modest beginnings, but the truth he had spent decades trying to bury. He saw a frightened boy from a poor family who had been mocked and dismissed by those with more money and better connections. He saw the wounds that had never healed, the insecurities that had driven him to accumulate wealth as if it could somehow fill the emptiness inside. He saw everything he had become in his desperate attempt to never feel powerless again. The recognition was shattering. Victor blinked rapidly, his vision blurring with tears he refused to let fall. He turned away from Miguel, from the crowd, from the judgment he saw in their eyes. His hands were trembling as he walked toward the fence, his confident stride reduced to something that looked almost like retreat. The spectators parted before him, uncertain whether to jeer at his apparent surrender or remain silent in the face of whatever internal battle was being waged behind his rigid expression. Elena watched Victor's departure with cautious hope. She had worked in his house for 3 years, had seen glimpses of the man behind the mask during unguarded moments. Late at night, when he thought no one was watching, Victor would sometimes sit alone in his study, staring at old photographs with an expression of profound sadness. She had never asked about those photographs, had never presumed to intrude on her employer's private grief. But she had wondered. She had seen enough to know that wealth did not protect against loneliness, that power could not purchase peace of mind. Miguel remained on Thunder's back, watching Victor walk away with the same compassionate gaze he had shown throughout the encounter. He did not call out, did not demand that the man return and face him. He simply waited, trusting that whatever was meant to happen would happen in its own time. Thunder stood calmly beneath him, occasionally shaking his great head or pawing gently at the ground, but showing none of the anxiety that had characterized his behavior before this remarkable afternoon. Samuel Crow approached the fence where Elena stood, placing a weathered hand on her shoulder. "Your boy has a gift," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. I have been around horses my whole life, and I have never seen anything like what he did today. But more than that, he has something rarer still. He has a good heart. He could have humiliated Hartwell, could have turned this crowd against him completely. Instead, he showed mercy to a man who deserved none. The old horseman shook his head slowly, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. Whatever happens with the money, you should be proud. You raised a remarkable son. Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She thought of Roberto, of how he had worked so hard to instill values in their son before his life was cut short. Every night, he used to tell Miguel stories, not about heroes who conquered through strength, but about ordinary people who changed the world through kindness and courage. He had believed that character mattered more than circumstance, that a person's worth was measured not by what they accumulated, but by how they treated others. Seeing Miguel embody those lessons so completely made Elena feel as if Roberto was somehow still with them, still guiding their son from beyond the veil of death. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed to set the clouds on fire. The crowd had begun to disperse, their conversations buzzing with excited retellings of what they had witnessed. Already, the story was growing, taking on the dimensions of legend. By tomorrow, it would spread through the town. By next week, it would reach the neighboring counties. By month's end, people across the state would be talking about the boy who tamed the untamable horse with nothing but kindness and patience. Miguel finally dismounted from Thunder, sliding down the horse's side with practiced ease despite his inexperience. He landed lightly on his feet and immediately turned to face the stallion, reaching up to stroke his face in the way that had become so natural between them. Thunder lowered his head, pressing his forehead against Miguel's chest in a gesture of affection that made several remaining spectators gasp with renewed amazement. The transformation was complete. Where once there had been a terrified, aggressive animal, there was now a gentle giant who had found his person. "We did it, boy," Miguel whispered. His words meant only for Thunder's ears. "Whatever happens next, no one can take this away from us. You showed them who you really are. You showed them all." Thunder's response was a soft nicker, a sound of contentment that vibrated through his massive body and into Miguel's hands where they rested on his face. The bond between them had been forged in secret, tested in public, and proven unbreakable. Nothing Victor Hartwell said or did could change that fundamental truth. But the day's surprises were not yet over. As the last rays of sunlight painted the arena in golden hues, a figure emerged from the main house and began walking toward them with purposeful strides. The figure walking toward them was Victor Hartwell, but something about him had changed. His shoulders, which had been squared with defensive pride, now seemed to carry a different kind of weight. His steps were slower, more deliberate, as if each one required conscious effort. In his hands, he carried a worn leather folder that looked out of place against his expensive clothing. The remaining spectators fell silent once more, their attention drawn to this unexpected development. Even those who had begun walking to their vehicles stopped and turned back, sensing that the story was not yet complete. Victor stopped a few feet from where Miguel stood with Thunder. For a long moment, he simply looked at them, his eyes moving from the boy to the horse and back again. When he finally spoke, his voice was different than before. The arrogance had drained away, leaving something raw and uncertain in its place. It was the voice of a man who had spent years building a fortress around his heart and had just watched a child breach its walls with nothing but honesty and compassion. "I owe you an apology," Victor said, the words clearly costing him enormous effort. "I have spent my whole life believing that strength meant never showing weakness, that success meant crushing anyone who stood in my way. I told myself that softness was for fools, that sentiment was a luxury I could not afford." He paused, his jaw working as he struggled to maintain his composure. "I was wrong about everything, about the horse, about you, about what truly matters in this world." The crowd exchanged shocked glances. No one had ever heard Victor Hartwell apologize for anything. He was famous for his stubborn refusal to admit fault. His lawyers equally famous for finding ways to deflect blame onto others. Yet here he stood, humbling himself before a child and a horse, with dozens of witnesses watching his unprecedented surrender. Whatever had happened in those few minutes he had spent alone, it had fundamentally altered something inside him. Victor opened the leather folder and withdrew a stack of papers that looked official and important. "These are the ownership documents for Thunder," he explained, his voice steadier now, but still carrying an undercurrent of emotion. "I bought him at auction 2 years ago from a man who had nearly destroyed him. I did not know his history then, did not know that he had been beaten and starved and broken in ways that no living creature should ever experience. By the time I understood why he was so aggressive, I had already made things worse. I treated him as a problem to be solved rather than a victim to be healed." He extended the papers toward Miguel, his hand trembling slightly. "I want you to have him. Not as payment for what you did today, but because he belongs with you. I have seen the way he responds to your presence, the way he trusts you completely. That horse has never trusted anyone, not since he was nearly killed by the man who owned him before me. But he trusts you, he loves you, and I have no right to keep him from someone who can give him what I never could." Miguel stared at the papers in disbelief, his mind struggling to process what was happening. He had come to the arena hoping only to protect Thunder, to show everyone that the horse deserved better than the life he had been living. He had dared to dream about the money, about what it could mean for his mother, but he had never imagined this. Ownership of Thunder meant responsibility, meant feed bills and veterinary care, and all the costs associated with keeping a horse healthy and happy. It was a gift that came with significant obligations. But it was also everything he had secretly wished for during those long nights in the stable, when he had whispered his dreams into Thunder's patient ears. He had imagined a future where the horse was his, where they could be together openly instead of meeting in secret after dark. He had pictured himself riding Thunder across open fields, feeling the wind in his face and the powerful muscles moving beneath him. Those fantasies had seemed as distant as the stars, impossible dreams that would never come true. Now they were being handed to him on official papers with Victor Hartwell's signature. Elena stepped forward, her protective instincts overriding her shock. "Mr. Hartwell," she said carefully, "we appreciate the gesture, but we cannot afford to keep a horse. We barely have enough money to feed ourselves. As much as Miguel loves Thunder, accepting this gift would only create burdens we are not equipped to handle." Her words were practical, sensible, the words of a mother who had learned through hard experience that gifts often came with hidden costs. Victor nodded, as if he had anticipated this objection. "I understand your concerns, and I have thought about them carefully." He reached into the folder again and withdrew a second set of documents. "This is a trust fund I have established in Miguel's name. It contains $200,000, as I originally promised, plus an additional $50,000 specifically designated for Thunder's care. The money will be managed by a local bank and released as needed for veterinary bills, feed, boarding, and any other expenses related to the horse." The crowd gasped collectively at this announcement. Victor Hartwell, the man who had tried to weasel out of his promise just minutes ago, was now offering more than he had originally pledged. The transformation was so complete, so unexpected, that some wondered if they were witnessing some kind of trick. But there was nothing deceptive in Victor's expression, nothing calculating in his eyes. He looked like a man who had been carrying a heavy burden and had finally found the courage to set it down. "There is one more thing," Victor continued, turning to face the assembled spectators. He raised his voice so that everyone could hear, his words carrying across the arena with surprising strength. "I have built my reputation on being hard, on being ruthless, on never showing mercy to anyone who crossed me. I thought that was what it meant to be successful. But today, a child taught me something that all my money could never buy. He taught me that true strength is not about domination. True strength is about connection, about understanding, about having the courage to be kind even when the world rewards cruelty. Miguel, I do not know if I can ever become the man you showed me I could be, but I am going to try." The silence that followed Victor's declaration seemed to stretch into eternity. No one moved, no one spoke. The magnitude of what they had witnessed was still settling into their minds, reshaping their understanding of the man they had thought they knew. Victor Hartwell, the tyrant of the county, the ruthless businessman who had crushed competitors and dismissed employees without a second thought, had just publicly admitted his failings and committed to change. It was the kind of transformation that happened in stories, in fairy tales, in the hopeful imaginings of children who still believed that people could become better. Yet here it was, unfolding in real time before their astonished eyes. Miguel was the first to move. He stepped forward, still holding Thunder's lead, and extended his small hand toward Victor. The gesture was simple but profound, an offer of acceptance from the very person who had the most reason to reject him. Victor stared at the outstretched hand for a moment, his expression shifting through a complex series of emotions. Then slowly, he reached out and clasped it in his own. The handshake was brief but meaningful, a bridge built across the chasm that had separated them just hours before. "Thank you, Mr. Hartwell," Miguel said, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed impossible given everything that had transpired. "Not just for Thunder and the money, but for listening, for really hearing what I was trying to say. That takes courage, and I know it was not easy for you." Victor's eyes glistened, and he quickly looked away, unable to maintain contact with a gaze that saw so deeply into his soul. He merely nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and released the boy's hand. Elena approached then, her own eyes wet with tears that she no longer tried to hide. She had spent 3 years working in this man's house, invisible and unacknowledged, just another servant to be ordered around. Now he had given her son a future, had provided them with resources that would transform their lives in ways she was only beginning to comprehend. She did not know how to express what she felt, did not have words adequate to the moment. So she simply placed her hand over her heart and bowed her head slightly, a gesture of gratitude that transcended language. The crowd began to applaud again, but this time the sound was different. Before, they had been celebrating Miguel's achievement with Thunder. Now they were applauding something even more remarkable. They were applauding redemption, the possibility that anyone, no matter how far they had strayed, could find their way back to decency. It was a message that resonated deeply with each of them, a reminder that their own mistakes and failures did not have to define their futures. If Victor Hartwell could change, perhaps they could too. Samuel Crow made his way through the crowd to stand before Victor, his weathered face unreadable. The two men had known each other for decades, their paths crossing periodically at auctions and competitions, and the various gatherings that brought horse people together. Samuel had never liked Victor, had always seen through his bluster to the insecurity beneath. But he had also given up hope that the man would ever confront his demons. Now, seeing the genuine remorse in Victor's eyes, Samuel felt something he had not expected. He felt respect. "You did well today, Hartwell," the old horseman said gruffly. "Took you long enough, but you got there in the end. Not many men have the guts to admit they were wrong in front of this many witnesses." He extended his own hand, which Victor shook with evident gratitude. "Maybe there is hope for you yet. Just make sure this is not a one-time performance. Change that does not last is worse than no change at all." Victor nodded solemnly. "I know," he replied. "I have a lot of work to do, a lot of wrongs to make right. This is just the beginning." He looked around at the ranch that had been his pride and his prison for so many years. "Starting tomorrow, things are going to be different around here. Not just with me, but with how I treat everyone who works for me. They deserve better than what I have given them." The declaration was met with murmurs of cautious approval from the ranch hands who had gathered at the edges of the crowd, workers who had suffered under Victor's demanding leadership and short temper. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the crowd slowly dispersed. They left in small groups, their conversations animated with excitement and wonder. Some headed to the local diner, knowing that the story they had to tell would earn them free coffee and an eager audience. Others went straight home to share the news with family members who had not been present. By morning, there would not be a single person in town who had not heard about the miracle at the Hartwell Ranch. Miguel led Thunder toward the stable, his mother walking beside him with her arm draped over his shoulders. The horse followed willingly, his massive head occasionally dipping to nudge the boy affectionately. They made a striking picture, the small child and the enormous stallion, united by a bond that defied explanation. Elena watched them together and felt a peace settle into her bones, a certainty that despite all the hardships they had endured, everything was going to be all right. When they reached Thunder's stall, Miguel paused at the entrance. This was where their secret friendship had begun, in the darkness and quiet of stolen moments. Now their relationship was public knowledge, celebrated rather than hidden. The horse seemed to sense the significance of the moment, standing patiently while Miguel opened the stall door and led him inside. Fresh hay had been spread across the floor, clean water filled the trough, and the evening feeding had already been prepared by ranch hands who had witnessed the day's events and wanted to contribute something to the miracle they had seen. Miguel spent a long time saying goodnight to Thunder, brushing his coat until it gleamed and checking his hooves for stones or damage. When he finally emerged from the stable, the stars were fully out and the ranch was quiet. His mother waited for him on a bench outside, her face peaceful in the moonlight. Tomorrow, everything would change. They would begin the process of building a new life, one that included security and hope and possibilities they had never dared imagine. But tonight, they simply sat together in grateful silence, letting the magnitude of their blessings wash over them. 5 years passed like pages turning in a book, each one bringing new chapters to the story that had begun on that dusty afternoon in the Hartwell Arena. Miguel, now 13 years old, had grown tall and strong, though he still carried the same gentle spirit that had allowed him to reach Thunder when no one else could. The bond between boy and horse had only deepened with time, becoming something that people traveled from distant counties to witness. They came not for spectacle or entertainment, but for hope. They came because they had heard the story and wanted to see for themselves that such miracles were possible. The ranch where Thunder now lived was no longer the Hartwell property. True to his word, Victor had transformed not only himself but his entire operation. He had sold the main estate and used the proceeds to establish a sanctuary for abused and abandoned horses, with Miguel and Elena serving as its primary caretakers. The sanctuary bore a simple name that spoke volumes about its mission. It was called Second Chances, and in its pastures and stables, dozens of horses that had been discarded by the world found healing and love. Elena no longer scrubbed floors or washed dishes for wealthy employers. She managed the sanctuary's operations with a quiet competence that surprised everyone who had known her only as a housekeeper. The years of hardship had given her an understanding of suffering that proved invaluable in caring for the broken animals that arrived at their gates. She could look at a horse and see its pain, could anticipate its needs before they became crises. The workers who served under her did so with respect and affection, knowing that she led not from authority, but from compassion. Miguel had become something of a legend in the horse community. Trainers came from across the country to study his methods, to understand how he achieved results that seemed to defy conventional wisdom. He always told them the same thing. "There is no secret," he would explain, his hand resting on Thunder's neck as the great stallion stood calmly beside him. "You simply have to see the animal as it truly is, not as you fear it might be. Every horse wants to trust. Every horse wants to connect. Your job is not to break them, but to show them that connection is safe." Thunder, now in his prime, had become the sanctuary's ambassador. His transformation from terrified aggressor to gentle giant served as living proof of what patience and kindness could accomplish. Children from local schools visited regularly, and Thunder would stand perfectly still while small hands patted his sides and stroked his mane. He seemed to understand that he had a role to play, that his story could inspire others the way Miguel's faith had inspired him. The scars on his body had faded but not disappeared, and Miguel never tried to hide them. They were part of Thunder's history, evidence of what he had survived and overcome. Victor Hartwell visited the sanctuary often, though he no longer dressed in expensive clothes or carried himself with the arrogance that had once defined him. He had found unexpected fulfillment in the work of redemption, channeling his business acumen into raising funds and awareness for animal welfare causes. The man who had once seen horses only as symbols of status and sources of profit now advocated tirelessly for their protection and humane treatment. It was, he often said, the most meaningful work he had ever done. On the 5th anniversary of the day that had changed everything, the sanctuary hosted a celebration that drew people from across the region. They gathered in the same arena where Miguel had first mounted Thunder, though the space had been transformed into a garden of remembrance. Flowers bloomed where dust had once swirled, and benches offered peaceful spots for reflection. At the center stood a bronze statue of a boy and a horse, their heads close together in the posture of shared secrets. The plaque at its base read simply, "Where understanding begins, miracles follow." Miguel stood before the crowd that had assembled, Thunder beside him as always. At 13, he was old enough to understand the full weight of what had happened 5 years ago, and young enough to still believe that such moments could happen again. He spoke about his father, about the lessons Roberto had taught him before his death. He spoke about his mother, whose strength and sacrifice had kept their family together through the darkest times. He spoke about Thunder, about the lonely nights they had shared and the trust they had built, one whisper at a time. But mostly, he spoke about the power of seeing others clearly. "Every person you meet is fighting a battle you cannot see," Miguel said, his voice carrying across the silent gathering. "Every animal that crosses your path carries wounds that may never fully heal. We can choose to judge them by their worst moments, to define them by their failures and their fears, or we can choose to look deeper, to find the spark of goodness that exists in every living soul. The first choice is easier. The second choice is better." Elena watched her son with tears streaming down her face, her heart so full of love and pride that she thought it might overflow. Beside her stood Samuel Crow, now in his 80s but still sharp-eyed and strong-willed. The old horseman had become a grandfather figure to Miguel, passing down decades of wisdom about horses and life. On her other side was Victor, who had long since become a friend rather than an employer. The unlikely family they had formed was testament to the same truth Miguel was speaking about. People could change, connections could form across the widest divides, love could heal the deepest wounds. As the sun set over the sanctuary, painting the sky in the same orange and gold hues that had witnessed the original miracle, Miguel wrapped his arms around Thunder's neck. The horse lowered his great head, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Boy and horse, human and animal, two souls that had found each other in the darkness and had walked it together into the light. Their story had touched thousands of lives and would continue to inspire generations to come. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and leave a like and comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear that miracles are still possible, that kindness is never wasted, and that even the most broken among us can find healing. From what part of the world are you watching? I would love to know. Until next time, remember, every creature deserves compassion, and every act of kindness ripples outward in ways we can never fully imagine.